get it started, maybe you can, I think everybody has read your book, but in case nobody has, just tell us a little bit about it.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you. Hi.
Hi everyone. The microphone is up.
Oh, is it?
Oh, I think it's where you just have to place it. Yeah, it's just like a singing microphone, so you have to put it quite close to, yeah. Hopefully it works, yeah.
So, hi, my name is Tahereh Mafi. I am the author of Shatter Me, which has a fancy name in Swedish. And it is a dystopian novel about a 17-year-old girl named Juliet who's living in this dystopian society where the government wants to use her as a weapon in their war. And she has to make a choice. Is she going to let them use her as a weapon, or is she going to fight back for the first time in her life and be a warrior? And it's her journey of self-discovery. It's her trying to understand what it means to be human, trying to find herself in a society, trying to tell her who to be. And it's a love story, it's a little action adventure-y, and ultimately it's about accepting yourself, finding yourself, believing in yourself, and standing up for what that is, for what you believe in.
So this world that Juliet lives in, it's a very dark and sad place. What made you write such a horrible world? And most importantly, is there any hope for this very damaged world?
Yeah, I actually think, with regard to the point about hope, I just want to say that I think one of the really beautiful things about young adult novels is that you can write these really bleak, depressing, sort of horrific stories, but I always feel like in young adult fiction, there's always some hope at the end of the story. There's always something that sort of keeps you going and keeps you happy, and I actually think that's what makes young adult fiction so incredible. Because I read a lot of literary fiction, a lot of adult fiction, and because I read very widely, and I highly encourage that. But most literary fiction is so depressing. It's about like miserable people and their miserable lives, and like nothing good ever happens, and that's supposed to be like really deep and really smart and really intelligent, and no offense to anybody out there who writes literary fiction, it's really pretty, but it's just really depressing. So I feel like with young adult fiction, we have an opportunity to say, hey, like things are pretty sucky, but they're gonna get better. Or here's this really crappy backdrop to set, you know, this person with these missed opportunities up and give her a chance to make something of herself. And I think that the juxtaposition of the really bleak atmosphere with this heroine who's trying to find herself and sort of emerge from that, it's really cool, and it just provides a cool contrast for someone who's coming into their own. I definitely, sorry, my shoes keep slipping. I wrote this book because, for many reasons. I mean, I was initially inspired to write the story simply because I had this image of a girl in my head. I was just sort of struck by this image of a girl who had been locked up. I could picture her sort of curled into herself. She was lonely and desperate and terrified, and all I knew about her was that she'd been locked up for a crime she didn't intend to commit. So she was guilty, but her intentions were good. But it sort of motivated me. Her voice was very strong in my head, and I was curious about who she might be and where she might end up. So I just started writing one day to see where it might go. And along the way, I asked myself a series of questions. I mean, in building this dystopian society, I mostly looked at what was happening to the world today. I watched a lot of documentaries, and I was watching this one documentary about like the fish in some sea somewhere in the States where all of the male fish had developed female reproductive organs because of all the estrogen that was being pumped into the water, because it's like the one thing that's not processed by our bodies, and it's just flushed through the system and into the rivers, and it was affecting all of the fish to the point where they were physically transformed, like manipulated, modified, and, you know, malformed, I guess. It was, you know, it's a negative thing. But it kind of freaked me out because I was like, this is actually happening. We're doing stuff to the environment that is actively affecting the animals and the plants and the ecosystem, and that was really scary. And it made me think that these sort of physical manipulations are actually very possible if we go very, very wrongly, if we go bad in one direction. And, you know, just looking at the, you know, natural disasters that just keep happening all over the place. It just kind of freaked me out a little, and I was like, what are we doing to the world, and what's going to happen if we keep going in this direction and nobody stops it? So I kind of asked some really hard questions and tried to imagine a world where things had gone horribly wrong.
You mentioned Juliet, how she's like curled up and sort of almost going crazy on the verge. So she's pretty broken, but she's also quite strong. So there's juxtaposition with her as well. How did you write that balance?
I have to say that I think oftentimes we like to read about strong characters, and I think most often that the idea of strength is often presented as physical strength. Like I can, punch someone in the face or kill someone with no regret or, beat this guy down and that makes me a badass. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think you can be physically very strong and mentally very deficient. And to me, I think the most important kind of strength is an internal kind of strength. And I wanted to really explore that. I wanted to take someone who was so mentally broken. When we meet Juliet in the book, she has been locked up for 264 days. She hasn't spoken to anyone in just as long. She hasn't touched anyone in just as long. And she's kind of like this skittish, terrified creature who is afraid of herself, is afraid to speak, is afraid to interact with people, and is really broken. But she holds on to this thread of hope and humanity. And I just really wanted to explore the mind of someone who had undergone serious difficulty, but still remained hopeful and optimistic and cared about people and had a sense of empathy and compassion, because I think that's a real, true kind of strength. And I wanted to watch her come into herself, find her voice. There are a lot of strike-throughs in this story. The prose is supposed to reflect, the writing is supposed to reflect her fractured state of mind. So as she has like a little journal that she writes things down in, and she writes things down and crosses them out, writes things down and crosses them out. And as she finds her voice and comes into herself, those strike-throughs lessen, and she becomes more clear-minded, more vocal, and she grows as a person. And that is reflected in all of the novels. So I wanted it to be a kind of strength that was more than just physical. She also has this great physical strength that is also, it's manifested in many different ways as the series evolves. But I was looking at more of an internal kind of strength.
I love the strike-throughs. I've never seen them in any other book I've read. Will they be continuing in the other books, or will they disappear altogether as she grows stronger?
In the second book, there's still some... in the first book, the strike-throughs are pretty severe in the first, first third of the book, and then they sort of decrease toward the end. In the second book, there are significantly fewer strike-throughs. And then in the third book, they're pretty much non-existent. So as she really comes into her own, the strike-throughs go away.
And in the second book, it's being released in February, right? In English?
Yes.
I think, and in Sweden here in March, I think.
April?
Right? April? Sorry. Okay. Without spoiling anything, what can you tell us about the second book?
Oh. Without spoiling anything.
It's difficult without spoiling, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe a teeny tiny spoiler.
Do you guys have all read the book? Yeah? Oh, that's awesome. Thanks. That's so great. You're familiar with Warner? Yeah. You learn a lot about him in the second book. A lot. And it's kind of surprising and kind of not what you expected, probably. And I hope it's interesting. And for those of you who are interested in the romantic element, there is a very, very, very long chapter in the second book.
Speaking of Warner, I think I'm crazy, but I think I love him, even though he's completely nuts and evil. And before any of you leave, we have this novella, Falla sönder, it's in Swedish. which you all will be getting. It's very, very exclusive. And it's told from a Warner's perspective. Tell us a little bit about this, was it the plan all along to write a novella?
This is called Destroy Me in the States. I don't even know where to begin. It was initially pitched, my publisher came to me and was like, we want to do like something as like a promotional thing, like in anticipation of the second book. We want to give readers something to sort of tide them over. And they were like, maybe you can write like a prequel from like Kenji's point of view, or maybe you can, you know, talk about Juliet's childhood or something. And I was like, that sounds really lame and really boring. And who likes prequels? Nobody. And I thought it would be really cool. I had already written the second book at this point, and there's a 2-week gap between the first book and the second book. And I thought, why not bridge that gap with a story from Warner's perspective after he drops off in the first book. So you all know where Juliet and Warner have a sort of confrontation, and she, spoiler alert, gets away. And he is, you don't hear from him and you're like, what the hell just happened? This picks up from exactly the moment when she leaves, and it's all in his head, and it leads into the second book. And I think it's really important in understanding, if you're into Warner and you're into understanding his character, I think it's pretty important because you get a really, really deep look into his mind, and you get to understand his motivations for why he does what he does.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite character or a favorite scene, maybe? In the first
book?
Yeah.
My favorite character, well, this is hard to say because I've already written all 3 books. I actually just finished drafting the 3rd book. I'm in revisions right now. So I know everything that's going to happen. But you haven't read those books, so you don't really know why I would love these characters so much. But I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of Kenji, because he is very much inspired by my brothers, and his sense of humor is, I mean, my brothers are like super inappropriate and ridiculous and kind of obnoxious, and I love them to death. And Kenji totally reminds me of my brothers, and it's really, really, really fun writing him. Every time he shows up on page, I just have a great time with him. And I also love Warner for obvious reasons, because he's crazy. And he doesn't follow the rules, which makes him really fun to write about. But favorite scenes? I don't know. I like all the scenes where they sort of take their clothes off. Sort of. You know, it's a YA novel.
They're almost good.